So to be on time and make sure that I'm being appropriate for everybody here that gave up part of your evening, on behalf of our committee, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Never to assume something. I'm just assuming that everybody knows what facility we're talking about, but in case you don't, so directly to my right, your left, adjacent to our student parking lot, is the old Civic Auditorium. Picture of it there. So that's the facility we're discussing. I just want to say thanks to the committee for the work that they've put in so far. My admin assistants at the district office are always pitching in, making sure that things are ready to go. Local patrons for their contributions to some of the history questions and information that we were looking for. Junior, senior high staff for letting us use their space. I could just come in and everything's set up. So that's good to know. Abby Berger's been really helpful with the technology piece of some of these things. And Mr. Young for doing the recording, which I'll just let you know that in case you have friends or family members that weren't able to come, we'll at some point in the near future, in the next day or two, I think, we'll have a link to the video and the recording so that if somebody wants to view it at a later time, they can. The Civic Auditorium Committee elected to conduct just a quick presentation tonight that's pretty informal, just to make sure that we're sharing some factual information, and then the other purpose is to just gauge our local district patrons, so not just the patrons of Wallace, but Silverton and Osborne and the Coeur d'Alene River drainage, to get a feel for what public interest is in the short and long term for that facility. So that's the point of tonight's meeting. So I just wanted to get some of that factual information. There's a terrific blog article that Ron Roizen put out that highlights the history of the Civic Auditorium. If you haven't had a chance to read that and you don't know a lot about the history of the facility, you can go and search for that. And it's a few pages long, but it talks about the start in terms of the idea for the Civic Auditorium and then the additional pieces and parts. So February 1944, Donald Callahan was kind of the spearhead of a group of folks who initially were just looking at the Wallace Civic Auditorium Association and having a very unique facility within Wallace as a community center, and then something that would pay tribute to military veterans from our area. And the picture of the plaque is still in the Commons when you walk in through the large bank of glass doors, and it talks about members of Wallace High School who gave their lives during the World War. So that just shows the testimony of what his idea was. The project was the first of its kind in Idaho and was one of very few in the United States in terms of how the idea of how the money was going to be brought together and then what the facility was for. Initially, the project cost was about $250,000. By the time they were done, it was about $300,000, which in today's dollars would be somewhere in the range of $4.8 million. And you'll hear some numbers like that when we get towards the end, when you start to look at building costs today and some of the things that we've found. In terms of the money collecting, there was a lot of donations similar to what we saw for the pool project. So you had the Wallace Elks Slippery Gulch events were held in simultaneous years to help draw in more funds. There's a story in Ron's article about a local businesswoman, Dolores Arnold, who maybe donated some funds as well. So a little rich history there. So that all started in 1944. In 1949, the first event was held in the facility. It wasn't quite finished, but it was finished enough that they could start with that. In 1951, the facility was transferred to the city of Wallace as ownership. In '53, it was transferred to the Wallace School District. And then in 1959, the 2 academic wings were added. Currently, what we have left is the east wing. The west wing was demolished for the building of this structure. And again, those were then occupied at that time. So it expanded from just a civic auditorium then to a functionality of a school. Moving forward a little bit more, 2003, we had the creation of the Wallace Civic Memorial Auditorium Association. That group corresponded with the Wallace School District, getting some money from the state and passing a construction bond to build this structure that we're in, the Wallace Junior Senior High. Their intent was to preserve the community facility and allow it to keep functioning for the community. That annual agreement occurred when the district transitioned to this facility here, and the agreement has continued ever since and continues up to today. Just a photo of how the use of the facility has kind of morphed since it was transitioned out of the high school as its primary use to back to that more of a community structure. Moving forward a little bit more, spring of 2022, in conversations that I had with our board chair, Dave Rounds, one of the things that he wanted to focus on, and it was a continued conversation with our current board chair, Mrs. Berger, was that we wanted to look at that facility and talk about it from the district's perspective, and then get our community involved in that conversation to determine what we were going to do. So in the spring this year, we brought together 19 members of our community, and that includes district staff, parents, patrons, and some of the members from the Civic Auditorium Association committee. So we've got about 19 folks. Not everybody shows at every meeting, but we usually have a pretty wide range of ideas and thoughts. One of the very first things I shared with them was the why. I asked them to come together, and again, that the why is to pool that collaborative effort from a wide range of people from our community to develop a short and long-term facility plan for the Civic Auditorium in that east wing. Again, tonight's specific purpose is to share some of this information and then also to get a feel for the potential future of that building. So if you've been in the area for much time, some of these pictures might look familiar. So talking about the past facility use, of course we talked about the fact that the Wallace School District used it as a primary high school facility. And even though that the facility hasn't seen a lot of use the last few years, it's been host to countless events, and from Slippery Gulch events, current storage for some of those things continue to be used for our Slippery Gulch events. We've had college exhibition games. YBL, our Youth Basketball League, used it for a number of years. We've had district tournaments in basketball and volleyball and wrestling. We've had club use, boxing, the archery club. We've had retirees that used it for pickleball activities. Community events like Slippery Gulch, the ATV and Jeep Jamboree, donkey basketball. They've rented out some of the classroom spaces. When the Minds do their 40-hour refreshers, at one point they would rent a room space for that week-long time for those types of things. Concerts, dances, plays. We had the youth center and after-school programs in the old cafeteria for a time being. Had a couple great haunted houses there, two of which were probably some of the scariest moments in my life. Getting to go down into the old locker rooms with strobe lights, and anyway, just a number of things throughout the time that facility has been used. I wanted to share with you a little bit of financial information from the district. As you may or may not know, our construction bond for this facility was paid off in July of this year. So that was approximately a $3.3 million bond, and what you will find is potential savings of about $70 per $100,000 assessed value on your primary home. So it is not just a coincidence that we're having this conversation after that bond was paid off, but I thought that was good to bring up. The Wallace School District's annual operating budget is about $5.4 million. 88% of that is spent on salary and benefits, which leaves 12% for everything else. Utilities, capital purchases, supplies, curriculum, maintenance. We have a fund balance of just shy of $2 million, a reserve of forest funds of $1.6 million. We passed a levy in March, a 2-year supplemental levy, $1.7 million per year. And last but not least, when the decision was made to build this facility, there was a pool of money that was going to cover the demolition of the entire structure. Because some of the structure was not demolished, there is still $300,000 sitting from that project initially to cover those costs, so that's where it sits for the future. If we ever had a demolition project, we'd have at least some of those funds remaining. In July of 2022, so this last summer, I reached out to an architect who has been working with us for a project at Silver Hills. His name's Ed Champagne. He's a Wallace alum. Asked him if he would give us some of his time for low to no cost. I really stress the no cost part. Just to have him come and take a look at that facility, knowing that we'd been talking about some potential thoughts and ideas of, what are we looking at if we start talking about a building or a demolition project. So I asked him if he would come in. He said absolutely, and he said I'll bring a structural engineer over and we'll just do a visual walkthrough just to kind of give you some ideas of what we're looking at. So in July, he and the engineer came over and they presented us with a report that separated the two structures. So we had the Civic Auditorium report, and then we had the East Academic Wing report. And some of the things that I would share with you that they discussed, which are key to know as we move forward with any type of ideas of what we may do with the facility. So we'll talk about the auditorium first. So what they found there were we have some roof drains that are causing rot through the whole system, from the top layer of the roof into where the trusses make contact with that roof. It is not impacting the trusses, however, it's just the roof structure between the two. So that would have to be addressed. So the roof truss members themselves appear to be structurally sound. The hydronic heat system has failed, and significant parts of that froze and burst. So currently there is no heat system in that building. The balcony structure itself is sound, so there's no concern that there's any weakening of that part of the building. Many of the restrooms are inoperable, and all of them lack ADA accessibility. The building itself, unless something is added to entryways, there is no ADA accessibility to the building. The boiler room during that particular meeting had about 2 to 2.5 feet of standing water in the boiler room. And there were multiple noted issues with electrical and mechanical systems, and they didn't get too far into that because they didn't bring somebody to dig into all of the mechanics and the electrical pieces. So those were some of the significant findings that they noted. For the east wing, it's worse. There's significant water intrusion down 2 sections of the wall. The primary intrusion is facing the Wallace Public Library. Because of the moisture, there's a significant amount of mold intrusion. There's failure on the interior and exterior framing and finish to the windows and doorways. Again, there's no ADA accessibility to the second floor or the building or the restrooms. And there's even more questionable issues with the electrical and mechanical systems. It was the engineers' just preliminary determination that the east wing is they said for us to do anything with that other than demolish it would be more expensive than starting over. So their recommendation is that the east wing be torn down, and if we ever chose to want a similar footprint, to start over. There's just not enough there now. I happened to go in August. We had a pretty good thunderstorm that came through. I wasn't able to access the second floor in July, so I went in August and could not figure out what sound I was hearing because I knew that most of the power was shut off and there's no fans. And what it was the water was running through, I believe, what was a room used by Hecla at one point, because it's still set up like a classroom. And there was enough water running down the interior of the wall that it was coming out of the doorway and running down the stairs in a waterfall format. So that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with there. Just to give you an idea, and I apologize if the pictures aren't perfect. This is the stairwell that goes to the second floor. You can see there's black mold on the light colored paint in all of the hallways. It does show up pretty well. This is the divider from the stairs coming up around the landing and then back up, and you can see a little bit of it on the wall. There was some significant water damage this last winter. One of the drains, the roof drains in this corner failed and froze, and it was allowing the water to come in and run down the wall underneath the balcony, and it was coming down the bleacher area onto the floor. Then you can kind of see here with the black, this is the baseline of the basketball court. And there's a gap in the black line because the floor is buckled. It's actually buckled here, and it's buckled underneath some of the materials that's stored there on the floor from the boxing club. You can see some of the tile that's come off the roof. I tried to get a photo of the floor itself. Because of the humidity on the floor, what it's starting to do, the boards run lengthways of the floor, and the boards are all starting to cup, so the outer edges are warping upward. It's not to the point where it has to be replaced, but it would have to be sanded to have something that would potentially be comparable to what we have in the gym floor here. The boards aren't loose, and I'm certainly you could still dribble a basketball there, all except for the dead spot that some of you may remember playing with right around this side of the key. Just wouldn't stop the ball dead on the floor. So it was always a good gimmick. If the other team didn't know it was there, you try to push them to that side. Extra turnovers here and there. Again, we talked a little bit about the interior and exterior framing around the windows. So what we're getting is water's coming down and running inside the frame, and then it's cooling up, and it's actually starting to erode some of the exterior stucco finish. But there's also 2x4s and 2x6s in the framing of the windows, and that's starting to fail as well. So that's why you're starting to see a lot of the fascia, the areas underneath the windows on the second floor doing the same thing. This is the cafeteria back where the fridge and freezer are. This is directly below that classroom that has a significant leak that faces the public library. So then the water's coming down through the floor, against the walls, and then we're starting to see a lot of the installation and stuff. And again, primary fascia damage where there's concrete damage is breaking there as well. This is the classroom that has the significant leak. And then one of the hallways that used to go into the west wing, kind of in front of the main office. So this is sunlight or daylight that you're seeing come in from the doorway there that comes out into the student parking lot. So just talking with Nick Hogemeyer, who's been a facility manager of the structure for quite some time, the engineer, and our architect, talking with Tony Underdahl, our current maintenance, and looking through it myself, some of the things that we're going to have to address. There is a considerable amount of asbestos in the structure, in both structures. One of the primary issues with the heat system is it is all wrapped with asbestos as an insulator. And asbestos removal is getting to be very difficult in that the permits and the licensing is very expensive, and companies don't get enough of it, so they don't keep their licensing up. So just for them to get to the heat system to repair it is going to require bringing somebody in to do the asbestos removal. It's also in the tile glue. As long as the tiles are stuck to the floor, it's great because the glue is secured. Same thing with the ceiling tiles that are above the lowered ceiling. But when the tiles pop from the floor, or the tiles in the ceiling pop loose, that glue is now exposed, and then there's an asbestos risk. We've got the mold abatement, cord floor repair, heat system repair, window replacement. I think there's 12 or 14 broken windows, at least one pane of a double pane window. Roof drains, ceiling tiles, ADA compliance, plumbing upgrades, exterior finish, water heat, electrical system upgrades. So those are all things, even in just the Civic Auditorium itself. So one of the things that I asked for, and I want to preface the next slide with, I asked for our architect to give us some numbers, knowing that he was going to volunteer his time. So I did not ask him for a line item type of report. I just wanted to know, when we came as a committee to this group, to talk about, what are we looking at in terms of facility, to sit down with those 19 people. It was 100% yes votes when we asked, would you like to see the Civic Auditorium facility be there and be available for the community? Absolutely. There's not a person on that committee that doesn't see value in having that structure, having access to that facility. But what we needed to gauge is, yes, you may be interested, but when you see what it's going to cost, how much willingness is there to support and back doing something with the current facility to get it where there's something usable. So I asked Ed if he could throw together some numbers just to let us know, are we talking $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, or multi-millions, or what would it be? So please keep that in mind, very rough numbers. And I had them put those numbers together based upon some worst case scenarios. For example, and I spoke with Herb Zanetti at length on the demolition of the West Wing to get an idea of how they dealt with the demolition debris. And what they were able to do at that time was work with the area below the Sunshine Mine, and they could move some of the materials from here to there, which is a very short distance. Or from time to time, they would even have a hole in the ground, as they call them, and they would truck in the concrete, and they just buried it, covered it over, and out of sight, out of mind. A lot of the wood material at that time could still be shipped to the Big Creek dump, and it was burnt. Those types of options are not necessarily available. So, for example, and these are just the 5 examples that I said, hey, throw us some numbers together, tell me what you think it may cost. So, for example, we said, well, what if there's not a financial commitment and the liability of the structure is such that we're going to demolish the structure and do something with it, because we can't just leave it as a demolished building. It can't sit in the middle of town, and it's got a basement in places, so we can't deal with that. So what if we just are going to either expand our parking lot or make a park? What is that going to cost? So sticker shock was a little extreme, primarily because where we're sitting right now, I don't have a large hole that needs to be filled, and I don't have a mining company that's wanting to take concrete riprap to use on a tailings pond. Trucking costs and fuel prices where they are right now, the rough ballpark estimate for option number 1 is $2.3 million for demolition, asphalt, and/or a combination of that in a park. If we look at option 2, which was keeping the Civic Auditorium and renovating it so that it's got ADA accessibility, the heat, electrical, mechanical, all those systems are upgraded, and we address the issues with restrooms, and we are currently using some of that east wing as storage. To look at that cost, $5.4 million. That includes still some demolition costs because the east wing would be demolished and it would have to be hauled off. If we look at option number 3, what that would include is demolishing everything. Building a new auditorium of similar footprint, adding some storage, and then addressing all of those issues. $8.3 million. And if we wanted to replace the entire structure, east wing Civic Auditorium with the current square footage, which would mean 2 stories on the east wing, $16.4 million. I wanted to throw up there option number 5, which is to do nothing with the current structure, which initially it doesn't have a lot of cost because there's not a lot of upkeep currently. The heat system is down, so our utility bill is low. But I would caution the group, and I've cautioned the committee, that all we're doing is prolonging further where we are right now. So anyway, so that kind of gives maybe that the hurdle, so to speak, that we're looking at. And I talked a little bit about the district's finances, and when you start talking about 2.3, 5.4, 8.3, we don't have a reserve within the district to just say, we'll tap all of our reserves and we can build a structure for the community. So to do anything with this, even if it's just to demolish and create a parking lot, there's going to have to be some form of money collection, whether it's through donations or a taxing measure like a bond. And that's the case with just the demolition. For us as a district to afford to tear down that facility that's owned by the district, we don't have the reserves to demolish the whole thing and haul it off, if we have to haul it outside of the Silver Valley. So knowing that, that's kind of where we are financially with the potential for those options. At the beginning of the presentation, I talked a little bit about wanting to know the public's opinion. So that's where we get to this part. So we put together a real quick survey, so can't have an excuse if the survey was too long, because it's literally one question and comments. And you can do it sitting right here if you can understand the technology of it all. You can zoom in on the QR code and it will take you right to the survey. So that's an option. So if you have a smartphone, you can again go to your camera, and Abby, just let me know when I say something that's incorrect, but that is an option. Abby has pieces of paper with the QR code on it. You can take those with you and scan them at home if you need to. We've got paper versions of the question and comments out on a table. If you want to do it that style, that's fine too. And we also have links to the survey on the district's website. And if you can't take the survey through any of those options, if you call the district office, we will mail you one. So the point of this is to try to get a large enough collection of responses so that we can say that it's statistically valid to get a sense for how we're going to move forward. Because even if everybody in here takes the survey, that still only gives us a certain number, and it's probably not a large enough collection of feelings from our patrons to let us know exactly what we want to do. The survey itself, we're going to leave open until the 4th of November. Again, we're going to have the presentation recorded so that it can be viewed later. And if you leave here tonight and you don't know how to access the survey, do not leave without talking with somebody on the committee, myself, Abby, Anna, and we'll make sure that you have access to that survey. If you don't know, the district website is wsd393.org. Again, there will be links there for the survey, the presentation, and if you need to call and ask for something to be mailed, or if you have questions beyond tonight, there's our district office phone number. So, I will open it up to questions as long as we don't get too off topic with a whole lot of stuff. But we can definitely answer some if you have things that you were thinking of throughout the presentation or clarification. Yes?
So has the disposal situation just gotten so full in the valley that they can't put this there, or they no longer allow these specific types of materials to be deposited in sets of broken items?
Well, and I've left messages with both Hecla, the DEQ, and the Galena mine to talk with their engineers and their environmental folks to see if they have a current project. Part of the issue is two of the places said they don't currently have something that's in the works where we could bring it there. Well, we don't have the material right now either way, so timing is part of the issue. We did have the concrete scan to see if maybe the materials it was made out of had a high enough lead level that it would be accepted as part of the repository, and it does not. So currently, today, nobody has a project where they need large pieces of concrete to use on whether it's a reinforcement of a tailings pond or they're deactivating a tailings pond that we could put it on top and then they could cap that. So it's not that it won't be available potentially in the future, there's just nothing right now. So that's why I went to the worst case scenario of, okay, if we can't deposit it here, where do we have to take it? And the answers were just outside of Missoula or almost into Liberty Lake. So that's why the cost of demolition is so high. Trucking is going to be astronomically expensive.
So obviously it depends on what option people choose, but what do you guys feel like the timeline is for having this project complete, depending on what it is?
Right. So what we would look for is we've given you the 5 options, and we're going to look to see where it scatters amongst the group that takes the survey. That might help us focus on how big of a lofty goal do we have. Are we talking about a $2 million goal, or are we talking about a $8 to $18 million goal, which just is that much more work.
If you went out, depending on what option was decided to move forward, and went out with a bond, get on the ballot, do you have any idea of what that would cost the taxpayers?
Oh boy, mental math. Okay, so and don't quote me on any of this, but I'll give you my best answer. So our $3.3 million bond that we paid off was about $70 per 100,000. So if you look at those projects, you can kind of use proportions to figure what it may cost. So a 6 million, just roughly double, and so forth. So it could be anywhere from 50 to 60 to 180 per 100,000. Yes.
So let's say we go with the option of rebuilding it. Do we have the funds afterwards to actually maintain it for a long period of time afterwards, or is it just going to slowly fall apart again and then we're back to the same topic?
We've talked about that in the committee, and that's the next step to this too. It's not just raising the funds to build a structure, but you're right. We can't just build a structure and then not have a long-term plan for maintenance and utilities and those types of things. I spoke with Mullen just to get an idea of what their facility costs. Now you have to keep in mind that they're heating a pool, but they're paying thousands of dollars a month to heat there and run lights in the pavilion. So, and I don't recall, I think Nick Hogemeyer stated somewhere in the $2,000 to $3,000 range in the winter time for a heat bill for the current facility when they were running heat at a comfortable level. So we have to be able to deal with that as well. And again, you know, and I'm just speaking as a superintendent of the school district, I don't see anywhere in our budget where I would be comfortable saying if we build the structure that the district will take on all maintenance, all utility costs, cleaning of the facility, management of the facility, because it's a bigger thing than that. If we're going to look at it as a community facility, then I think we're going to have to look at that as an approach.
Are these 5 options the only possibilities?
The possibilities are endless. But I told Ed that I would only send him 5 because I didn't want to get too crazy. So there's anything from to do nothing to, I'm sure we could come up with a way to spend $100 million. But those were just to kind of give an idea of what we're looking at as potential costs.
If we do choose to renovate or to fix it up, is this district or is the committee looking to like grants and stuff for fundraising? I know the state has extra funds through COVID funds and so does the federal government. Are we looking to tap into that to maybe get some funds to renovate for us and have an educational system?
We've had the conversation about how to do something that's not just a tax measure, and I think people are interested. I don't know if I had anybody step up and say that they were the person who wanted to do that. I've spoke with a couple other districts in southeast Idaho that did very similar projects. They took old school facilities or district office facilities and turned them into a community hub where they brought in healthcare. College campus had some things there, and they were able to access grants from a number of different places, not just something similar to the Kroc Center, but health organizations were willing to partner with them because of potential use, dentistry type options. So there are definitely some things there. The key to that is going to be finding the people who are willing to put in the time, because it's a very labor intensive and time intensive to get those grants. Most of them are competitive, and there's only so much money to divide up. But that's definitely something we've looked at. We don't have to bite this all off as, well, if it's going to cost us $10 million, it's got to be a $10 million bond. Could that be an option? Sure, we can throw that out there as a possible tax collection, but we could look at at-kind donations and grants and whittle away at that. So maybe instead of a $10 million bond, construction bond, maybe it's 5. And the other half is raised some other way. But there again, all of those things are going to be man hours and time. Mike, did you have?
Trying to figure out how to frame this. Regardless of cost, everything's driven by cost. What's the educational use, the educational purpose for the school district to spend any money on the auditorium? Other than, demo, because eventually something happens, but what's the purpose for the school district to pour money into it or spend any money on it in terms of education and use by the school district and the students?
Speaking only as a superintendent, not counseling anybody else on the committee or our board. And I've thought about that question a number of times. Is that facility for us right now, based upon our current enrollment, and I would say even our next 5 to 7 years of enrollment, is a nicety. That's not a necessity. We've been able to function and house everything we need within our two district buildings that we currently have and not use that facility at all, except for storage. So if we were to lose the whole building, we're still gonna have to address some storage facility, which would probably cost, not even a whole building now would probably cost us $60,000 or more. Outside of that, that's the only need that the district has. Now, does that mean we couldn't do some things on a broader scale? Absolutely. If you have small children or relatives who have small children that are doing YBL basketball, that's gonna start up in the next couple of months. They have to practice on the weekends and after our high school and junior high sports are done, which puts them at 7 and 8 o'clock. But that doesn't impact our school per se, reading, writing, and math directly. But there's still some things that we can do, and I always want to keep in mind that we're part of the community like everything else is. But as far as a direct impact on student learning, I don't know if I could correlate one currently. Now, if we had an expansion in population, again, I don't know when that will be. We have some great indicators we can watch, and those indicators aren't leading to us needing to expand out of this building or the elementary into something else within the next 5 to 7 years, unless something really changed. Mike, go ahead.
So the school district actually owns this,
Correct.
is that correct?
Yes.
So if you do nothing, you've got an albatross over there that's gonna have to have something that is, you know, have any dehumidifiers in there, and lighting moisture in the summer. That thing's run from the inside, not the outside.
Correct.
So that building's gonna come down sooner or later. And I guess the two part of that is when they did tear the gym down years ago, there was some money that was supposed to be set aside for the tear down of that building. So that still resides in the school district.
Correct. Yeah, so the $300,000 is still sitting in its own fund from that original project. And you're correct in that at some point, if the community is not in support financially or whatever for that, the district is still going to have to address that structure at some point. The engineer felt that the Civic Auditorium itself, if anything happened, it would probably collapse from the roof down and be maintained within the walls of the structure. He's a little more concerned about the east wing being in close proximity to the library, housing across the street, and then the access roads and the creek. That structure is not built the same, and he said it very well could crumple straight down, or it could go and you could have debris in every direction. So that one's a little less of a known. The other issue is if you have a controlled demolition, you're able to pull things out. You could take the asbestos out first, take the wood out second, and then places are more apt to take material if they know what they're getting. If you have a cave-in like happened with the elementary school, the old elementary, all of your rubble ends up being classified the same, which increases the cost. Certain places won't take it, especially if there's asbestos. And because you cannot, once it's collapsed, you cannot take all that material out. The likelihood of them taking anything except for a place that will accept asbestos is very minimal. So that will increase the cost significantly.
So I'm just trying to get a clarification. Notice the school district owns the building, so they choose to go in, they'll run the bond for making a new civic auditorium, but then what is the path towards, you know, like somebody in the community and they're taking ownership, or is it, as Mr. Stepbrook pointed out, you know, like now an additional cost to the district to be able to maintain it? So I'm just kind of confused on the path for ownership.
And I think there's a lot of options, whether it's district maintained ownership. I don't want to speak for the district and say that we could do something where if it's a community type project, that the district looks at moving ownership to the community instead of, you know, because at one point there wasn't district property. That could be reversed. We'd have to look at, what that would look like. So that type of agreement, maybe it's a lease, a 100-year lease or a 99-year. There's all kinds of options that I think have to come with that understanding as we.
We have to have a pretty good understanding of that because, if you run a bond for, I can't remember what the numbers were, to rebuild the auditorium, and then there isn't anybody civically wise that's, going to step in and take over that part.
Right.
You now have a really large maintenance part that, 88% of your budget already goes to salaries and benefits, and that little 12% gets smaller and smaller.
And you would probably have to look, if we were going to keep it all within some tax measure for the district, you would probably have to look at something in a bond or a levy, probably more of a levy, a facility levy, annually or you can do longer term, permanent facility levies again, it's just another tax measure to collect the funds to maintain the structure. Those are all options, but they all come with that price tag. And that would have to be part of the understanding of moving forward is what that plan is, how all of that is going to look. Because again, it's not just building the structure. You got to figure out the maintenance and utilities.
So would it be safe to say that the school district, if we did option 5 and did nothing, that the school district probably doesn't even have the money to clean up the mess if it does come crumble and fall and crash? We probably couldn't handle it on our own.
Not as is.
Yeah.
At some point, though, the liability becomes such that you just run a bond to demolish it. And when safety and liability gets to a point, because right now a bond requires a supermajority, 66% approval. There's a point where the majority piece, it's an amount that's levied. And there's no vote because of the liability purpose.
Did the engineer give any indication of how long it would stand? No.
But I can tell you, I've been in that facility over the last 5 or 6 years, and Tony can probably contest to this. Not having heat in there this last winter aged that building more in that year than probably the 5 or 6 years before. And again, every year that happens, it's just going to get worse and worse. But it depends on winter. That we had a lot of snow last year and they shoveled the roof, which that very well could have, if we would have let it continue to pile up.
Todd? Boy, this is the desire to see the structure maintained and used is very strong in this community, of course. Has your committee looked at the possibility of forming or assisting in the formation of a recreation district to be a taxing entity, to raise money, to maintain and improve the structure? Because if they did that, and if it was formed, then there's mechanisms for cooperative agreements between two taxing entities to transfer ownership or use or responsibility. Because I think that, from my standpoint, I don't see how the school district's going to maintain that structure, pay for it, improve it. But a recreation district with its own taxing authority very well could. And then once that's in place, there's possibilities for other sources of funding. Somehow, the end game being get it out of the coffers of the school district and to another entity. I would think that would.
Our conversation on that's been very short. We have talked about the recreational district and how it removes. It doesn't have us in the center, but it allows us to still be involved.
Okay.
Are you referring to like a nonprofit? Is that what you're thinking, Mr. Grossetter?
No, a recreation district is a taxing entity with its own jurisdiction and authorities, just like a highway district, just like a sewer district, just like a cemetery district. And the district boundaries can be set by petition, which in this case would probably be the district, the school district boundaries. So the people in that district could vote to form a recreation district. And those are recognized under Idaho law.
Are there other ones in the state? being.
Oh, I'm sure there's other recreation districts, but I couldn't tell you of one.
Okay.
You mentioned that our community is lacking in things for the kids to do. The YBL program is struggling because there's no gym space. I know that's been a struggle with all sports and athletics. As a community in general, we have 2 gyms for all schools. Is this the only option to consider to expand for recreational use? I guess my question is, is this our only option, is to rebuild this facility or fix this facility to have another gym, or would the school consider something else to add on to expand our athletics for the kids?
Like what? I mean, are you like expanding onto another building?
Or building something else that could potentially hold, I mean, I know like the real life building in Post Falls is just basically a barn building that just has gyms. Like, is there some sort of option for that? I mean, our athletics are struggling immensely, like we're losing all sorts of programs. Is that something that the school district would consider, or is that something that as a community we need to look into, like a recreational building?
I think I'd go just off the cuff. I kind of go back to Mike's question or the comment of looking at what the district itself as a school district needs. I don't know if it would be in our best interest to add on or expand athletic facilities for district funds, from district funds, because it's not going to benefit the district just as the district itself. Now, it's going to benefit the kids within our district for sure, but I don't know that the best approach to that would be for the district to take all that on. Not to mention the fact that currently our primary, well, not our primary, our only owned land would be what this facility sits on with the grass out here. That facility, we have about 5 acres in Silverton where the district office is and some of the baseball field, and then the Silver Hills site. That is our only flat ground, buildable ground that we would, so if we're gonna add anything, it would have to be on one of those structures. And committing that flat ground to that type of facility would potentially reduce our ability to ever expand for academic purpose. So I think I would say an idea like that could be somewhere, but I don't know that that's a good focus for the district as something.
I'm just curious if this is our only option, like to have more gym space, to have more,
In terms of the Wallace district, I would say yes.
Okay.
Now, there's other places in the community that have some, potentially some flat ground,
Right.
but I don't know who would own those or what willingness there is to do a project like that. A couple more questions? Yeah.
You've kind of taken away all the selling points to privatizing it, but are there hurdles to just selling the property and letting somebody take it over that are other than all the things you've already
Right, absolutely. And, we have not even looked into zoning. We have a historical district that we're part of. So those conversations have not been had yet either. I would assume that a piece of property can be sold, and then it's up to the seller or the buyer to do with it what it is under the confines of wherever they're building, which would be in Wallace city limits. But
Would that have to go to a vote?
would what have to go to the vote?
Sell it.
Yes, by Idaho code.
You know the current value? Do you know the current value of it?
Of the structure,
Of the structure of the property?
negative $2.3 million. I mean, I'm not, and I wish I could say I'm being a smart aleck, but that's the reality. For somebody to buy that structure, at a minimum, I think the investment would be astronomical. Amber?
So if we were to sell it, wouldn't that though kind of hurt the district in a way, because now we lost our flat land, so if we did have to build a new school, now we no longer have a flat piece of land to
Could be.
go on?
Or there could be, you know, you can create agreements. Lawyers love agreements. You can have contracts and say, you know, if we sell it for this purpose, this is what, you know, that wouldn't be out of the question necessarily. But, and again, it's getting a little beyond the scope of the district's look. That has been thought of or talked about. Yeah.
One of the biggest reasons we've been working a number of years on the Valley Technical Education Committee on putting together that workforce training for our valley is the criteria came down was we didn't have a facility to jointly equip with training equipment and facilities to train the students. And so that program ended up coming up with a curriculum that could be used within the 3 different districts. And we fell short of having that facility to send kids to learn the tools and learn those classrooms. So I see this as a facility that could be constructed in that manner and to create a facility for that use. And there brings in that private sector, public sector merge, and that's what K-Tech reformed was the private sector money that came in and paid for the facility and paid for much of the upstart of that. And it was the school district's ability to get funds through the state education system to facilitate the grading and make it academically beneficial for the students. So there was that nexus there, I mean, the school district being able to bring the academic side, not just another private school, and it was an opportunity for, of course, every student to go take that training of education. I see that as a mechanism for how to fund this. It's definitely going to have to be a substantial amount of private sector money and some sort of agreement of cooperation. And that's where I think you'll find that maintenance money and that initial build outfit facility. And if you have a plan like that, not just another gymnasium and a room to store lumber in it, but a plan for how to utilize it and benefit our school district and our students, I think it's a win-win, and that's the private sector money gets spent here.
I appreciate everybody's willingness to come this evening and ask those questions. Again, I'll back up if you didn't have a chance to scan that code. If you needed to stop at the table and pick up a piece of paper with the code or with the survey itself, you can do that here and leave it. You don't have to take it with you. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to the district office if you have questions. There'll be more information. We've got the Facebook site now that we'll use to let you know what the survey said, kind of let you know maybe what the committee's talking about, and as decisions are made, how we move forward. So again, thank you all very much, and have a great evening.